The Life Outdoors Radio Show with Nate Bailey. Everything you need to know about hunting Southern Oregon. Wake the wild within.
Welcome to another edition of the Life Outdoors Radio Show. Hey guys, before we jump into this week's segment, let's talk a little bit about the Life Outdoors TV. Yes, we do have a TV show, and it's over on the Dove TV channel. So if you have cable or a Roku, you could go watch the Dove, and you can watch the Life Outdoors every Saturday at 5 p.m. or every Sunday at 7 p.m. And that's the Life Outdoors with a Z. Also, if you want to know more about the Life Outdoors and you want to see what we're doing, you can go check us out at thelifeoutdoors.org, and that's the Life Outdoors with a Z. Isn't it weird how certain things will trigger a memory with you? The other day, I was zipping a zipper, and one of the old metal type zippers that are heavy duty on canvas, it was on a bag, but that same noise sent me back to being a 12-year-old again, and sent me back to a time and a place when I look forward to every year, and that time and place was deer season. Back in those days, that was about the only big game hunting that I did on my own was deer hunting, and we would go over to Ochoco's, which is over in Central Oregon, and it was a family reunion along with deer hunting. But that zipper always reminded me of our old Coleman tent. We had, I don't know if you guys remember the old Coleman canvas tents. They were the best thing ever. This tent lasted clear until, from the time I was a kid, it was my parents. And then my wife and I had it for a while after that. So it lasted probably over, 36, 37 years. And the zipper on that tent would always remind me of the mornings when we were deer hunting over in Ochoco's. And it seems like every morning over there would freeze in October. So this was like the beginning of October, and every morning you'd get up and you'd freeze. But us kids slept in the tents, and we had a lot of blankets and a lot of, we were taken care of. We had foam mattresses, and we did not get cold. I'll tell you that. Sometimes our face would get cold, and sometimes, anything that got out of our sleeping bag would get cold. But it's amazing to have that one noise remind you of all that. And so the reason that zipper would remind me, it just kicked me right back to that same time, is because my uncle would come over and unzip the tent. And he'd say, "Hey guys, it's time to get up. Are you guys going to go out?" And we'd been going out, with them on and off all of our life up until this point. But being a 12-year-old meant that in our family structure, it meant when you were 11 on your 12th birthday, you would get a rifle. And that meant that you were able to hunt the next year. So we'd have to get our hunter safety course. And then if you're 12 years old in Oregon, you could hunt legally the next year. And so it's always different on your 12th birthday. And everybody in camp knew it. And everybody in camp wanted to see your rifle, the whole family, from your grandfathers to your cousins to your uncles and people that we, brought with us into the camp. Everybody wanted to see what this rifle was that you got. And because, the 12th birthday was such a big deal. And what's really cool about it is my uncle had a lot of help during that time. He'd help my dad and other people find their kids' rifles, because he's kind of like the leader of gear when it came to hunting, and so he already kind of knew what I had for a rifle, but we would get our rifles out, take it around, and we'd show it to everybody and let everybody kind of see what we had for our hunting. And then, you had uncles all around you looking at you, seeing how you handled that rifle as you were showing it to people. It was kind of one of those rights that you were able to get a rifle, and that meant that you've moved into a different area in your life. You're now something that was beyond childhood and boyhood. And it was a big deal. And it's something that I think we've lost in our culture, but it was a super big deal. And so that first year with this with this new responsibility for me, when I heard that zipper, it brought me right back into that spot. And it brought me right back into being around all the people that are no longer with us anymore. And it just brought such fond memories. But that same year, we did actually harvest a deer. My brother and I harvested a deer, and it was a pretty interesting story because we were going up to a place. My uncle decided that he was going to go out and cut some more firewood. We'd already been hunting. We saw a couple bucks. As a 12-year-old, you're not as savvy with being fast and safe. So our MO was always being safe. My uncles, my dad, everybody that was around you, cousins and everybody, the emphasis was on being safe, not fast. So there were times that we saw some bucks that I just couldn't get the shot off. You know, somebody who was more advanced definitely could have. But it wasn't, man, it was so cool because you get back around the fire and everybody would be telling you how good you did because you didn't push something that you shouldn't have pushed. It wasn't like, man, you could have, if you would have just been a little bit faster, you could have got that buck. That's not what it was. What it was, I am proud of you for not pushing and doing something that you shouldn't have done, trying to get that buck. And so that's kind of the background of what was going on this day. And my uncle decided he was going to go up and get some firewood. And he went to a spot that we used to call the high country. And we used to think, oh my gosh, it's so dark and dense up there. But if you watched any of our videos of Gage and I, that's the stuff that we hunt for elk over there in Ochiko. And it's just, that's the place that we stay anymore. And we just absolutely love it. But back in those days, it was like, that's the place that we're going. It might be a little bit too high, you know. And so we headed up there, and my brother was sitting up front. My mom was driving, and we were in a little S10 pickup, and I was sitting in the back of the pickup, which had a canopy, but I had a lawn chair. And I'll never forget this, the day I live. And as we were going up there to the lawn chair, on the way up, we didn't get out of camp maybe 3/4 of a mile, and all of a sudden there's a buck. And so my brother and I jump out, and we chase this buck up over the ridge, and we try to find it up on top of the hill, and we lost it. We weren't able to get on top of it and get a shot off. And so we pile back in the pickup and start making our way up the road again. And we couldn't go 5 more miles, and we ran into, you know, another couple little fork and horns going up the hill. My brother and I, again, neither one of us could get off. And our rule in the family was you had to get, I don't remember what the law is about getting off the road to shoot, but our family was like, you have to be at least 50 yards off the road because it just doesn't seem right, you know? And so, we tried to get off the road. We tried to get over there, and we tried to get a shot at these guys. And, you know, then again, if there was somebody that was a little bit more skilled, my brother was probably 14 and I was 12. And if we had a little bit more skill, we probably would have been able to do something. My mom had to be with me, and my brother, he was old enough that he could go on his own. So we'd try to circle around and go up and around and try to shoot these bucks, but we never did make it. We never got around. And so we come around, and we get up, start getting into the high country where the firs are. That's kind of how we decided that the high country is high country, because there's fir trees up there and spruce and some of those high country trees. And we get around, and all of a sudden there's a little fork and horn, and it's a nice fork and horn. It's a good plump fork and horn. And so I yell at Mom, stop. And so she slams on the brakes, and I'm at the back of so I could get out of the canopy. I always kept the chair right at the back so I could flip up the door and get out. Well, when she stopped, I went gearing forward, and hit all the way up against. My brother gets out, and I get out, and my brother is quite a ways ahead of me, and he goes down into the canyon, and we follow this little buck into the canyon a little bit, and we get down there quite a ways away from the road, and I hear pow, and I'm thinking, oh man, he's got him. So I boogied over there, and I get over to him, and he's like, I don't know, I shot at him, I think I hit him, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner of our eye, we see that little buck again, and he's still moving. And so my brother shoots him again, and I saw, it's like slow motion sometimes, especially when it's a very sought after event. It's like slow motion. And I saw out of the corner of my eye, I look, and I heard that pow, and I looked over the corner of my eye, and I could see a tuft where it hit him, and it hit him pretty good. But the deer is still moving, and my brother puts another one in him, and I'm just standing kind of in awe. All of a sudden, I'm thinking, what in the world's going on? 12-year-old, right? And mom's coming right there with me, and Marty keeps pushing. He keeps shooting, and finally he hits that deer probably 4 times, and that deer walks away from us. And granted, I'm a 12-year-old kid. He's a 14-year-old kid, and he's like, man, I did everything. I thought I was doing everything right. And he was starting to feel pretty bad because, we've seen deer die before, and we've seen deer fall from shots. I mean, most of the time you shoot them with a rifle, they just fall. And for some reason, I don't know what bullets we were using. Who knows? But Marty was shooting a 243, and for some reason, the deer just didn't go down. And from then on, I was like, 243s are no good, but that's a different story altogether. But we follow this deer, and Marty takes off, and I said, well, Mom and I we'll go on the ridge line, and Mom was kind of like leading us, and we're going to go up and around, and then you can take off after it on its trail, and see if you can find some blood, and we're going to go up and around in case he gets out, in case he's still, and you push him, that way he doesn't get away from us. So Marty waited there for a second, for probably 5 minutes for us to make our way, or 10 minutes to make our way to where we could get quite a ways around before he started pushing down through there. And sure enough, he starts going in there, and that little buck kind of sneaks out, and it's sneaking out towards up the hill. Doesn't even know we're there. We're upwind and uphill of it. And I tell Mom, there it is. I'm going to shoot him in the head. Mom says, no, shoot him in the body. The head's. I said, nope, I'm shooting him in the head. We already got some in the body. And so, sure enough, I pull up, and I don't know how far it was. But back in those days, some far shots didn't seem like they were that far. But I pulled up, and I shot him right square in the head. And he went down, boom. And Marty comes right up behind him. And so he's like, man, I'm so glad we got this thing. And I shot him in the head to where the antlers were so wobbly, you couldn't really drag him with the antlers. And we started looking at it. And we'd been around a lot of deer before that have been shot, but nothing that we'd taken with our own hand. And it was just a tough situation, it seemed like. There's so many emotions when you kill a deer. There's so many things that, when you kill an animal, there's so many emotions. And we're going through every one of them. But man, the emotions were thick. I mean, thicker than any other time in my life, except for maybe like at funerals and things like that. But we finally decided, we're going to clean this thing. So we started cleaning it, and a couple of those shots hit some guts. And so it was nasty in the back, and we're worrying about the meat. We're trying to get it cleaned off. And the blood, just the amount of blood that was in that deer, it was all over us by the time that we got that thing cleaned and back in the pickup. And his heart had been exploded, and the lungs were exploded, and all that blood we were pretty young, and so we were not clean. I could remember to this day how bloody I was. And I always thought to myself, wow, that's a big deal, because the blood that kept life in this deer now was all over me. And that spoke to me for years. And when we get back from the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about that metaphor, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that affected me. We could sit here and talk about it all day long, but until you've been there, it's one of those things that you just have to be there to understand the gravity of that. So when we get back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Hunting Southern Oregon. The Life Outdoors radio show on Gold Country Radio with Nate Bailey. Keep it tuned right here for more ways to perfect your craft. Coming up next, Wake the Wild Within.
Want to get your business noticed? Sponsor a show on KKFO Gold Country Radio on 103.3 FM and create awareness through on-air announcements, our online stream at goldcountryradio.org, and our podcasts that live on forever. Your message reaches a broad local audience while also targeting listeners who choose to tune in to the shows they love. Plus, we promote your sponsorship across our website and social media. For more information, email goldcountryradio@gmail.com. Call 541-238-6989 or visit goldcountryradio.org. Gold Country Radio, your message heard locally and beyond.
The Life Outdoors radio show with Nate Bailey. Everything you need to know about hunting Southern Oregon. Wake the Wild Within.
I'll always remember the little lamb that we brought into the earth. It's crazy to be around baby goats or baby sheep, and I particularly like baby goats. That's what we have, is little itty bitty goats, and they are so personable. These little guys, they you could play with them. When we pulled our goats off of the moms, we pulled them off and we had to bottle feed them. We had to feed them ourselves, and then they started thinking that we were mom. And we had several of these in our herd, and we pulled a little goat off and baby fed him, and then we would look them over. We'd look all the little babies over, and we picked the very best one. And that little goat, we had taken care of him for, all year up until now. And it's early spring now, it's cold out still, but it's starting to warm up, and we could start seeing the sugars come up into the grass, and you could tell that the little goats were enjoying life. Life was, getting easier on them because the carbohydrates that the earth was producing with the sunshine and the photosynthesis going on and all of the stuff around them, and they would climb up and grab the very newest little nibbles, and they would get those, and it would they get those carbohydrates in their system, and it bring on their playfulness. And you could go out there in the pasture with the goats, and they would jump up, and you could stomp your feet at them, and they'd take off running. And when they took off, they'd kick sideways, kind of like they're little acrobats. And as they're kicking sideways, they look like they were trying to show off. They go around, come back, butt heads in front of you, and then come back and look at you again, and you kick at them and jump at them, and they do it again. And it's just the funnest time of year. When the goats turned one, it was kind of strange. Mom and Dad were looking through them, and they're picking through them, and they're looking at their hooves, looking at their behind their ears, and they picked the very best one, and they tied him up. And we're thinking, what's going on today? Something different is happening. And as they had him tied up, and it started getting a little bit darker and darker, and we're right to that twilight area, and they marched this goat out, and they took him, the goat that we loved and that we'd been around, that we'd raised for a year, and they took a very big knife, and they chopped his head off right in front of us, drained all the blood, cut him up, took all the entrails, and started roasting him on a fire. They did this because they were told to. It's a tradition that we've had in our culture since the time that we were delivered out of Egypt. And we did this in remembrance of the sacrifice that the Lord made to get us out of Egypt. And then we took all the blood that we put it over our door seal. And then we took a portion of all that meat, and whatever meat we didn't eat that night, and we ate that little lamb. We ate our lamb. It had to be the gravity of the situation, and the emotions ran so high in us that we knew that this is something special. This is something that deserves reverence. And we didn't take anything for granted anymore. And we understood what it takes to save our lives. And it was the blood of the Lamb. Now, this is a story that many people over thousands of years have lived through. And I tell this story. I never have experienced it myself, but I tell the story because this is the Passover. This is what all of the people were doing clear up until 70 AD. This is what people did. This is what the Jewish people did, is they were doing slaying a lamb every year to memorize what blood did for them. And the blood kept them, if you know the Bible story, if you look back in Genesis, or Exodus, excuse me, if you look back in Exodus, if you look at what the blood did, when you spread that over you, that kept the angel of death from taking you. And it was a huge metaphor of what was to come. And how do I know that? Well, because Revelation talks about this lamb. It talks about when in Revelation 5:6, the Apostle John saw Jesus as the lamb, looking like he had been slain. And then if you look at like John 1, John the Baptist sees and says, "Behold, the Lamb who has taken away the sin of the world." And then in Corinthians 5:7 also established a relationship between Jesus and the Passover lamb. So this Passover lamb was a metaphor, and God made people go out and do this to the point of where they ate that same lamb after they watched it get its head chopped off, and they drained all of the blood out and took its blood and put it over their door seals. This happened at twilight on Passover. Could you imagine what twilight must have been like at that time? Could you imagine what that must have looked like across, and all of the young kids that were crying over their lambs, over the beautiful little goat that they played with, or the little sheep that they played with, and over that animal that's a year old that they've lived with for a year. It's a metaphor of what really was going to take place at the cross thousands of years later. And this happened clear up until, just a little interesting note here, this happened clear up until the day that Jesus died up on the cross. And then the day until after that, the next 7, which is completion. If you look at the Bible, the number 7 means completion. So in 70 AD, once the temple was taken down, they no longer celebrated Passover past that, because there was no need, because Jesus had already taken, he'd already sacrificed and fixed death on one occasion at the cross. There was no more need to have the metaphor of the Passover. Now, think that through. The reason I bring this up, you guys, the reason I bring this up is God, when he called them, he did not, when he said, hey, you need to understand what this gravity of Jesus dying on the cross is, he didn't go to a synagogue somewhere and say, hey, I'm going to teach you this concept about propitiation and how, Jesus died on the cross for our sins. I'm going to teach you this. No, he didn't. You know what he did? He showed them, to a small point, because this was a lamb, for goodness sake. And he showed them what the value of blood, how it saved them from death. And then he made them eat of it. He made them become a part of it. It was no longer just a concept, but it was actualized in something that they had to experience and something that they had to go through. I equate that to the same thing as what we do hunting. When I look back towards the cross, I see the same blood. And I'll tell you what, the story that I told you before, when my brother and I were taking care of that deer, when we had that blood all over the top of us, when I start reading these stories now and talking about blood in the Bible, it means something completely different to me. It does not mean that there's just a simple little amount of blood that we see in our Bible verses and in Sunday school when kids are being taught, they kind of skip over what blood really represents. And no, farmers and hunters know exactly what that is. And I think that's something that we need to bring back in this culture. And that's why we created the life outdoors, because we are no longer, the thing about the outdoors is you're no longer conceptualizing. You're not just sitting somewhere listening to a story and trying to put it into your ideas of how life should be. Rather, you're out and you're experiencing it. When you're wearing the blood of an animal that you took, and the gravity of that moment, it hangs on you. And so when you read about the blood of the lamb, or you read about how the bloody cross was through the Gospels, when you read about that stuff, what's going on is you're no longer having to conceptualize it, but if you've been covered in something blood and you've taken the life of something, you now understand what the representation of sacrifice for your own life is. Every bite of meat now becomes a metaphor for what was done on the cross. Even the meat that here's the problem that we have. Here's the problem that we have in our world, and the modern world, is we don't have to deal with this anymore. 80% of Americans, and Americans are still a young nation, but 80% of us in this world right now live in cities that don't have to deal with getting their food from the farm. Now, don't get me wrong. Part of the people that live there, they definitely understand where their food comes from. But I would venture to say that a ton of people in the cities have never, ever seen the blood of an animal shed. But yet every one of them goes by a meat counter, or goes to McDonald's, or goes to Burger King. And we live in a society now that tries to keep those things from us, tries to keep the realities of what it takes to keep you alive. And that's why it's so hard. I think our modern age, if you look throughout the Bible, it's called world. Whenever you see the term world, it's an idea that the world is trying to get your mind off of the provision that God has set for you. And that's actually what coming back into faith is actually giving up your own perception of how reality is, and living under his perception, and allowing him to change the way that you think. It's not to save you and get you out of hell. It's changing the way you think, and that's what gets you out of hell. But when we look at what we're doing when we're out in the woods, and when we're looking at especially wearing blood, and we know the sacrifice, and then you take that blood, and it's no different for a farmer or a farm kid or a 4-H kid that have raised up animals and eat them. It's no different. They understand the gravity of these passages. They're not sitting on pews and just conceptualizing it. They actually lived it out. And we at the Life Outdoors, man, that's what we're trying to get people in the outdoors for, is because we want the scriptures to come alive for them. We don't want, my worry is that people take it for granted, that they walk by the meat counter and all they see are steaks, and they don't see animals. And they don't understand the gravity of what that meat counter means. Now, I'm not trying to get people to where they get sick of it. But what I am trying to do is I'm trying to bring people's minds back to what the reality of life is. And the reality is there is sacrifice for us to live. And it's the grand metaphor of the grand narrative of what Jesus did to bring us back to the image of God, to bring us back into the fold through the marriage supper to the Lamb. He sacrificed on the cross. And I know you guys probably came here to listen to hunting, but it's all the same. Here's the deal: is life is not separate. Life is not in its own little compartmentalization. Life is this organic thing that is filled with everything that you do, has ramifications within the realm of this kingdom that is Jesus's. And I can't not say that, because that is the truth. And that's exactly what we do here at the Life Outdoors. We're trying to bring that to you. So, you hunters out there, next time you are around an animal or take an animal, understand the gravity of that situation. Look at the blood. Feel it. Understand that you took blood, and that same substance. Now, it's not the same blood, of course, but that same substance is what sets you free. It was like a blood sacrifice on a cross. that shows what Jesus did. And it's not about, it's not the blood itself, it's Jesus himself. But at the same time, the blood is the representation of what he did. He laid his life down so we would have it. And it dripped down into the depths and it rose again. And that's what becoming a Christian is being reborn into that kingdom of his. And you will be actually born back into the human that God always intended you to be, which is in his image. So when we look at this, when you go out and you feel the cold in the air, that speaks something different than sitting and talking about it. When you feel the sunshine, the warmth of the sunshine on a day that's super cold, that's speaking of something rather than just sitting and talking about it. You got to experience it. So the next time you're out, experience those things. And then if you have a hard time trying to get your mind set on that, listen to what we're trying to tell you about this. We're trying to lead people into this at the Life Outdoors. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to lead people into this thought and start looking for Christ in everything that you do, because he is there and everywhere that you are. All right, guys, thank you for listening. And that's why we say waking that wild within, because what happens is when you step off of these conceptual ideas and start walking in it, that there's something inside of you that just becomes alive. And that is what we're trying to invoke in people, because they will see Jesus in that. Thanks a bunch. Until then, you guys wake that wild within and get out there.
Thanks for listening to the Life Outdoors radio show. Tune in next Sunday evening at 7 p.m. to continue to hone the primitive skills that man has always been meant to master. Hunting, Southern Oregon. The Life Outdoors radio show with Nate Bailey. Wake the wild within.